All right, guys. So this lecture here is going to be about wisdom versus intelligence, and I categorize this under political economy because, as I talked about in other sections of this online course, that our three basic needs obviously is food, shelter, that kind of stuff, and then we have our relationships. And then we obviously have our finances, and and the finances obviously relates to political economy. So it's very important that we understand how wisdom and intelligence comes into play, because then we can understand what is within our control and what's not within our control, and then make our decisions, our financial decisions accordingly. Um, I'm a big believer in and actually the principle of Spiderbitevenom philosophy is that there's a balance between uh, our selfish desires and being compassionate towards others, and that's all determined by how much we desire things beyond our basic needs. So, um, anyways, when it comes to intelligence, in the past, there's been a lot of controversy, and even to this day, there's a lot of controversy centered around intelligence because some well-known scientists and well-known people have measured intelligence or come up with ways to measure intelligence, and we shouldn't be afraid of what people discover. Uh, you know, because if we take anything personally, we're judging things, and judgment obviously comes out of fear, and that fear can lead to anger, and anger leads to hate. And we have to remember, if you understand the principle of Tao philosophy, which is for every up there's a down, for every light there's a darkness. I mean, all these things, the opposites of each other, work hand in hand. And where there's people who are more genetically, whether that's demographically, or whether that's more on an individual basis. There's oftentimes an imbalance. Well, I should say that the balance is going to be maintained some one way or the other, but usually if a person is imbalanced, in other words, maybe he's gifted in intelligence wise, and there's going to be the opposite is true when it comes to how wise he is. And a lot of times, I would say, I would even go as far as to say that most people confuse wisdom and intelligence, when really in some ways they're the exact opposite of each other, and at the same time they work hand in hand. And this is because our consciousness is, you know, obviously not tangible. In other words, we can't like touch our consciousness. We can't. I mean, when I say consciousness, I mean our emotional makeup as human beings. We can't actually physically touch that. We know it's there, obviously, because we're alive. We're aware of that. But it's not something that we can change physically. It requires our mental capacity to change that, and that's through understanding and experience. Whereas everything else is pretty much tangible. It's physical in some way or somehow. Even the air that we breathe, there's some physics involved. You can be broken down into air molecules, and if you put air in a balloon or put air in a bubble or something, you can actually see that air. The air becomes visible to some degree. But we have to understand that when we see the controversy over intelligence, it's people who see it that way are missing the point. It's to me, intelligence is obviously genetic, and to some degree, but it's like any other genetic. It's like beauty, for example. Beauty is very much related to genetics. Sure, you can do things to improve your how beautiful you are. If you're a man, you can get in shape and make yourself more handsome. But genetically, there's a limit to that. You can do the best you can and still not be as handsome as maybe another man who's genetically, more gifted in that area. Same thing with intelligence. Sure, we can learn things. We can become very smart. It might require more time. Whereas someone who's more gifted and intelligently needs less time because things come easier to them. But it's not something that deserves to be envied. In fact, nothing is. Because if you go back to the Tao philosophy, where light needs the darkness, and up needs the down, and coming needs the going, and black needs the white. There's no reason to envy these things, because whereas one person may be genetically more intelligent than us, for the most part, all of us who are not as intelligent can still learn how to be wise, which is in many respects just as important, if not more important. This is how, when you take the Tao philosophy and you understand the how things are opposite of each other, you discover that there's other ways that are created to make things opposite of each other, because you can't you can't otherwise explain it. So, and intelligence is one of those things. It's easy to think that being intelligent is the most important thing, because who doesn't want to be around a smart person? But a smart person can do foolish things. And so that's some of the things we're going to learn here in this lecture. And if you see this picture here, this graph here I put up, you see on the left hand side, you see a quote from Epictetus. And Epictetus was a Stoic philosopher. So, at his time, and even today, he's considered a wise person. Someone who had great wisdom. Because many of the things he says obviously stood at the test of time. So, and when you apply the things he says, it's amazing how they work. So, what a lot of things that Epictetus said obviously must be true. Now, when you look at this man on the right, J.R. Oppenheimer. Now, this guy was considered one of the most gifted people who have ever lived. He was the quote-unquote father of the atomic bomb. He basically took what Einstein discovered and was able to produce a weapon. And it's noted that his intelligence was somewhere like 195 IQ, and that's just phenomenal. I mean, most people are nowhere. That's like double the intelligence of most people, and or even more so, more than double. And yet he felt like what he discovered, as far as how to harness atomic energy, he felt like a fool afterwards, which is the opposite of someone who's wise, of wisdom. Foolishness is the opposite of wisdom. And in one of his quotes here, he says, "Now I become death, a destroyer of worlds," because he realized that his intelligence was only as good enough to discover the principles of the universe, which can be very destructive, very chaotic. And that power in the wrong hands, in other words, that power in the hands of someone who's not wise, could be self-destructing, So this is why, Epictetus, is considered wise versus J.R. Roberts. J. Roberts Oppenheimer is considered intelligent. Very distinct things. attributes, I guess you would say. But once you understand how important it is to differentiate these things, then you can actually stop being envious of people who are highly intelligent, and you can recognize that it is what it is, and focus on becoming more of a wise person. And even if you're an intelligent person, this is interesting too. Even if you're an intelligent person like this J.R. Oppenheimer, you still need wisdom. You still need to become wise. There's right now, as I'm making this video, there's this supposedly coronavirus outbreak, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories about whether or not it's a bioweapon or something like that. And truth is that we don't know for sure, but we do know that it is capable. Someone who has enough intelligence to bioengineer a virus that can kill lots of people. That intelligence in the hands of a foolish person, could be dangerous, potentially, self-destructive. So anyone who's intelligent, highly intelligent, needs wisdom as well. Whereas you can be wise and not be that intelligent at all. You can have great wisdom and have average intelligence. You obviously need some intelligence, because with the absence of wisdom, at least in my opinion, you are, basically mentally retarded. And unfortunately, most black people, and I'm black myself, so I'm not making any discriminations, but unfortunately, most black people are retarded, because they are not interested in wisdom. And that's because they've been raised in an environment where they've felt like they should feel angry all the time, and should be afraid, and that fear obviously leading to anger. Is anger is another word for madness, and madness means you make foolish mistakes. You judge things without understanding the cause and what it's doing to you emotionally. Therefore, you justify things, and when you justify something, especially something foolish, you think you're brilliant. You think you're a wise individual, but you're not. Because without that element of compassion and everything that you do, then you're just going to harm others, and no matter how smart you are, you just that too is just going to be self-destructive. So, if you look down here where I talk about wisdom, I say wisdom is discovering the principles of consciousness. And two, intelligence is discovering the principles of the universe. So, wisdom is really taking a deep interest into why we do what we do. And the more you take an interest in that, the more you discover that pretty much everything that we do can be broken down into a couple of principles. And one of the main principles that Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, one of those principles he discovered was one of these, was a quote that he made here, where he says, "Happiness and freedom begin with a clear understanding of one principle. Some things are within your control, some things are not." And I would go as far, and others who study Epictetus and would say that he would go as far as to say that most things are beyond your control, because anything that is beyond what you can do yourself, which is controlling your reactions to things, controlling your actions towards others, anything beyond that is beyond your control. So in other words, you can't control how somebody treats you. You can't control how somebody judges you. You can't control some idiot that maybe wants to rob you or steal something from you. You can't control any of that. You can't control the government and what it decides to do, and those things can't be controlled. And the reason why those things can't be controlled is because those things are established over time by people who were alive and maybe dead now, put in place to control others, and which includes you, people like yourself. So unless you can, and we will talk about this in another section, unless you can live as long as the history of the world, the history of civilization, if you can live that, if your lifespan, was just as long as that whole time period, then yeah, you could change it. The other way you can change it is you can do something really evil and forget every body around you and the people involved in society in general, and come up with a diabolical plan to seize power. But nowadays, even that's nearly impossible, because what this man here discovered, J.R. Roberts Oppenheimer, is so powerful that it is self-destructive. So it's not like, in history or in times past where, someone who wanted to take control or take power by force can do so without necessarily just killing himself or destroying himself. Most of the times he did end up getting killed or destroying himself, but there were some victors. There were some people who were successful, and that system that they put in place is what we're living under today. However, even that system is checked by what this man discovered, which is a self-destructive power that that nowadays, if someone was to try to seize power, take over the world, so to speak, take the cheap and easy way out of getting power, getting what he wants, then that can end up destroying the planet, end up destroying the whole world. So this is why we have these international governing bodies that try to protect the world civilization from some dummy, some idiot who has that kind of ambition. Because just because his power is checked, by mutual assured destruction, it doesn't stop the dummies and the idiots and the ones who think they're intelligent, but in reality they're retarded. It doesn't stop them from pushing these political agendas and buying their way to power and fame and nobility, so that they can think that they can control everybody with this force, with this overwhelming self-destructive power. So when we understand that, it really kind of gives you an idea of why politics exist and why the economy that we have, which in a lot of respects is non-existent, but it's really a political exercise, because the system that we have in place is there. It's been, like I said before, it's been established by wise people to protect ourselves from highly intelligent people who discovered something that could be self-destructive. And when we see some political movement that tries to go against human nature, tries to go against tradition, that seems to try to upend everything that's been tried before, and everything that we think is new and trendy or whatever. It's just vanity. It ends up as a waste of time. I'm going to talk more about our political structure in the United States and how that was based on principles from wise men like Epictetus and other philosophers like Plato and Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, and the Stoics, because once you understand the principles of consciousness, why we do the things we do, then you will understand why we have to have some kind of governing body, some kind of governing system to protect us from ourselves. Because we're all selfish. We're all desire more than our basic needs. And and unless you're a monk, living in a cave somewhere, not bothering anybody, you're potentially dangerous. You're absolutely potentially dangerous. You're a potentially a madman running the streets, who forgot to take their medicine and is brandishing a weapon or a knife or something and may kill somebody to get what he thinks he needs to survive. I mean, that's basically what we're dealing with. I mean, everybody to some degree is that idiot, is that dummy. Even J.R. Roberts Oppenheimer, which is why, he made this quote. He realized that what he discovered in the hands of some dummy and some idiot can destroy the world. And the more you study Spiderbitevenom philosophy, the combination of Jedi, Stoic, and Tao philosophy, the more you're going to realize that that most people are retarded, especially black folks. And it's not because they can't, learn to be smart, but it's because their consciousness, their emotional makeup is rooted in anger and fear. And that's because of the legacy of what's been done to black people throughout history. So while it's no fault of their own, at the same time, if they choose to blame others and justify their foolishness, it's just as bad as being guilty of acting stupid and just being retarded and dumbed down and idiotic. So and that's subjective of Spiderbitevenom philosophy. It's not to judge any discoveries of who's smarter than who and that sort of thing. The objective is to gain peace of mind and wisdom, to gain knowledge for defense, defense against foolishness and defense against making foolish mistakes and coming up with dumb ideas and wasting time, wasting our life trying to rewrite history and think that we're going to somehow take over the world because we don't like the way it is. That's what Spiderbitevenom philosophy is about. It's about helping you understand that there's a reason why one demographic of people may be smarter than us. But at the same time, helping us to not be envy of that and focus on, our ability to control ourselves, to control our reactions. And in doing so, we'll be happier people. We'll have that peace of mind, which is so powerful. You're going to realize that that's the real power in the universe, is a peace of mind. And you're going to be able to have such insight. You're going to be able to, which to me is one of the great powers you're gonna receive through this online course. But you're gonna be able to see the future, see this, see the past. I can't really articulate how I've thought about these things and speculated on what it was like in historical times, between certain characters and certain people. And then I go read the history book that I've never read before, and it will confirm everything that I already suspected. And that's because, I at a deep level, I understand Tao philosophy, or the principle behind it, the Jedi philosophy, the balance, and between selfishness and compassion, and the Stoic philosophy, which is, controlling things, trying, attempting to control things that are beyond our control. Once you understand that, then you can immediately assign motive to people who lived in the past, or were once alive and now are dead and gone, and people in the future. You can not necessarily predict things, but you can imagine how things are going to work out, and you pretty much are going to be 90% to 100% accurate. I mean, that's how powerful Spiderbitevenom philosophy is. And you'll, you got to be careful, because sometimes you might think you're smarter than this guy here, this J.R. Roberts guy, or maybe wiser than Epictetus, because when you have that kind of insight, you can make decisions based on that, your daily decisions. You realize that you won't need, motivation anymore. You won't, because you already know what the motive is. You won't need someone yelling at you and coaching you and telling you, oh, you got to get up off your ass and do this and this and that. Like, none of that's necessary. And you won't waste a lot of time feeling angry and bitter about the past, about what one race of people maybe has done to another race of people. You'll actually look at the past objectively and see how it's just a confirmation of the Jedi / Tao / Stoic philosophy. You'll once you look at things objectively without judging them, that's the true beginning of wisdom. And you can plan your life accordingly. You can make decisions accordingly. You can make spontaneous decisions accordingly. Because once you have that kind of knowledge, you're no longer afraid. You will automatically, especially through experience, you will automatically know what to do in that moment. You already know what to do. That's another thing, and this will probably be the last thing I'm going to talk about in this lecture. But you're going to realize that, intelligence is it's just discovering things that have already been there. creativity goes a one step beyond that. But what creativity does, and I'll have a whole lecture on creativity, but briefly, what creativity does is taking a principle of the universe that you discovered. Let's say music, like you discover, like when you study music theory, which I have, you discover that there's a principle in the universe called harmony. And then once you discover that principle, then you can imagine something that has never been done before using those principles. So principles are like tools. Like you got a toolbox, and you got, a wrench, a screwdriver, or something like that. And then, or maybe a hammer. And you could take those tools and build anything. You could build a house. Let's say you build a house, but this house is unique. This house is built like no other. And more than likely it will be unique because, you have unique tastes and desires and interests. So that house is going to look like something that's never been constructed before. And principles are the same way, and that's how creativity works. You're taking principles that have already been discovered, by people in the past who, based their discoveries off of principles they've learned from their predecessors. And now you're adding on to that knowledge for future generations. That's what creativity is, because you've taken those principles and created something new. And the whole universe is based on that principle. The creation of the universe is based on that principle of things coming together and then as a tool used to create something new. So this is why, again, you need that peace of mind. Once you have that peace of mind, you'll discover these powers. You'll discover this type of wisdom that, can transform the universe to some degree, because even though we will die at some point, some future generation, if we did spend our lives creating things, and which is discovering new things, they will build upon that and take what we discovered and add upon that and create new things. And it just perpetuates itself, throughout the eternity. And you played a part in that. If you spend your life, taking these principles and creating something new out of it, not wasting your life trying to take over the world, when at this point that's impossible. Thanks to this man here, J.R. Roberts Oppenheimer, you're not going to be taking over the world. You will destroy yourself. You will kill yourself and everyone around you before that would happen. So anyway, so that kind of wraps up this political economy lecture. I just kind of want to give you a macro overview of these principles, so that because that's all you really need, so that you can make the micro decisions in your day-to-day life. You need these kind of principles You don't need someone telling you what micro decisions they made, because that may not apply to you. You need to understand the principles of consciousness, and to some degree, not as important, but to some degree, the principles of the universe. So that wraps up this lecture, and hopefully I made sense, and so we'll go on to the next section of this online course.